All right, I think that means it's time. So I'm Steve Dalton. Let me address the elephant in the room. I do realize the irony that we're going to spend 2 hours talking about a process called the 2-hour job search. So unfortunately, that doesn't mean you will have a job when you walk out of here. It doesn't quite work like that. But I'm going to do my best to return the maximum return on investment for this time that you're giving me today. I know it's no small feat to take 2 hours out of your schedule. So by way of background, I'm a former chemical engineer. Any other engineers out there? No engineers. Okay, my people. I was a terrible chemical engineer, so I escaped by doing strategy consulting with A.T. Kearney. Did that for a few years. The vision all along was to go back and get my MBA, which I did at Duke's Business School, which is pronounced Fuqua. It can go wrong in a hurry, that spelling. Got my dream job in marketing, selling delicious Pillsbury biscuits at General Mills in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Realized quickly I hated my dream job. Then realized quickly I had no idea how to find a job when interviews were not provided to me on campus. And that terrified me because I'm a rule follower at heart. I did everything my career coaches had ever told me, but I was still somehow unprepared for the rest of my life. So that's where my obsession with job searching began. I ended up going back to my alma mater and joined the Career Center at Duke as a consultant, like a special projects consultant to help international students with their job searches. A few years in, the 2008 financial crisis hit. Finding jobs got really, really hard. Tech firms were laying people off. I don't know if any of this sounds familiar. And I had an insight that led me to start writing books. We're going to talk about one of those books, and I'll share what the insight is as we get a little bit further into this. But without further ado, here's what we're going to cover over the next 2 hours. So in terms of learning objectives, I want you to all feel more confident and competent in the following 3 items by the time you leave here today. I want you to feel better about being able to prioritize target employers efficiently, how to effectively and comfortably request time and knowledge from strangers, and conduct informational meetings that maximize the chance you can turn a perfect stranger into an advocate in a single half-an-hour conversation. So we'll spend about half an hour on each of those topics. We'll do, and then we'll turn it over to your Q&A. Okay. So my question, what do we expect? I'm kind of obsessed with this topic of instructions versus tips. So when we get a bookshelf or any kind of furniture from IKEA, do we expect tips or instructions in the box? Instructions, yeah, that would be pretty frustrating if they said, think about putting the big pieces together first. Like, no, it's frustrating enough having to put something together from IKEA. What about when you're driving from point A to point B? Do you expect tips? Think about taking a right here, or do you expect instructions for the most efficient route? Instructions, okay. Now, what do we expect when it comes to job searching? Tips or instructions? Tips, isn't that weird? That seems like a massive disconnect to me. Like, whenever we're stressed and when the stakes are high, we have more important things to do with our time. Why don't we expect instructions here as well instead of tips? So that's what I do. That was the kind of aha I had in 2008. I had students losing their offers, some losing visas, having to go back home and trying to pay off their debts in a local currency. I realized then that my students who got surprise layoff notices had the ability to follow instructions, but they didn't have the energy to curate tips into a usable format. And in reality, they were doing their second, third, or fourth job search, and I'd done hundreds, so wasn't I, as the person paid to be there, in a better position to make that set of instructions than each individual job seeker. So that's what kind of set me down my current path. There weren't instructions for that one thing that is so much more important than anything else in our life, our ability to pay off our debts and provide for our loved ones. That's too important to leave to chance with tips. It deserves its own set of instructions. So that's what I do. So if you've ever felt like anxiety when people have you ever been told to network? Yeah, that's great. Yes, that's a tip. That's not an instruction. How do we do that networking? I don't know. Just do it. Or email alumni. You've been told to email alumni. Okay, great. Yes, I agree. How? How do I do that thing? Not your fault. You haven't been taught. Do informational interviews. Everybody loves to tell you to do informational interviews, but they don't tell you how to do informational interviews. They give you the tip instead of the instructions. So any of these things, if they've caused you anxiety, it is not your fault. You have not been trained to do these things. It's like me handing you a list of ingredients and telling you to go bake a German chocolate cake. Like, no, there's a process there. I'm going to fill in the gaps. I'm going to give you one recipe that helps you do all of these things because it's too important to leave to chance. So you're learning this recipe at exactly the right time. You are young. This is the same process you will use not just to find jobs right now, but to get full-time offers from your internships. It's how you will get promoted at the head of your start class once you join a company. It's how you will sell business if sales is ever part of your work. So this skill, this ability to turn strangers into advocates on demand, will serve you well for the rest of your life. Okay, so is contacting strangers really necessary? I'm a scientist by nature, so I like stats. Brown, Setchner, and Topa did a study at the New York Fed where they found that for every one person that was hired through an online job posting application, a certain number greater than one were hired through internal referrals. What do you think that number is? Just shout out some guesses. 3. What else? 8. Any other guesses? 7. 12. So the correct answer is 12. Now, I'm a chemical engineer bred for awkwardness, so the people thing is not my jam, but faced with those odds, I mean, every time you apply online for a job, you're hoping you're one of the handful out of the hundreds they choose to interview, but you're also hoping it's the 1 out of 13 jobs that goes to the online applicant instead of the internal referral, somebody on the inside already knew. So that's awful stacked on top of terrible. I can't abide those odds, so I had to accept. When faced with those odds, the only predictable way to get interviews is to get referrals, but I can't trust that you all have relevant networks for the careers you're pursuing right now. So the only way to get these referrals is to have the ability to turn strangers into advocates on demand. So that is what I drilled down on for my first book called The 2-Hour Job Search. It's an exact set of instructions for doing that super important thing that nobody ever teaches you a recipe for. Okay, one note, I'm gonna talk about referrals a lot today, but I want human referrals. I want people who care about our outcomes, eyes and ears that will continue to look out on our behalf. Big companies will often talk about referrals. Oh, get a referral so when you do your application, you can put somebody's name down. Application referrals are not the same thing. That's sort of it's a nice to have, but we kind of know online applications are a black hole, and they will get to be more so as you get more expensive to employ. So online applications may work while you're an undergrad, but the odds drop pretty dramatically once you get more expensive. So we want human referrals, people that will be there 6 months from now, a year from now, not just a name that we can put on an application. Okay, so how exactly do we get these interviews? The answer is pretty simple. Networking. Yeah! Okay, absolutely hate that term. It's like cliche. It's just sort of a vague guidance whenever people don't have anything more specific to tell you. They tell you to network. Oh, it's not working, do more of it. I'm going to use the word constantly today, but no, when I use it, I mean something far more specific. I mean the act of using informational meetings to get referrals, to get interviews. That's a bit of a mouthful to repeat every time. I'm going to call that networking. But by defining it more narrowly and breaking it into a few different steps, we can optimize that. Like any good engineer, we can optimize each step in that chain to make sure that we get a good return on investment, or at least the best return on investment we can. Now, I used to ask audiences, like, how do you feel about networking? If you had to rate yourself on a scale from 1 to 5 at networking, how do you think you do? And people said 4, 3, 4, 5, like pretty good. People felt pretty good about that. That did not sync up with my appointments, however, where people were really stressed about networking. So I asked people, like, tell me more about that. Why do you feel confident? And they said, well, I get along with all my teammates. Whenever I'm put on a new team, my coworkers and I, we always get along. Sometimes they even become my friends. I call that reactive networking. It's table stakes. You're supposed to get along with coworkers. You're supposed to get along with teammates. Those are people who are expecting to work with you. Now, proactive networking is what I'm really concerned with. What about people who are not expecting to hear from you? How do you turn them into advocates? And that's a totally different skill set, again, that nobody teaches you. So the 2-Hour Job Search really focuses on that proactive networking piece. This is my recipe. So there might be other recipes. I don't know of them. But if you said, Steve, you're fired. Start looking for a job right now. It's 5:30. By 7:30, I'd be done for the day. Any further investment of time would be extraneous, unnecessary. Any less would be insufficient. I simply need people to respond to me after that first 2 hours in order to make further progress. But by being strategic in that first 2 hours, we can set up a very, very high return job search process from that point forward. So I made this recipe for my students at Fuqua. I ended up staying there for 17 years, just left last year to do this full time because I ran out of vacation. Penguin Random House heard about this process. I got to publish a book on it in 2012. I got to revise it in 2020. Just sold my 100,000th copy, which is crazy to me. But a big recurring theme of this process is if you focus on learning, you will get job leads. It's a natural byproduct. If you focus on job leads, you will get neither of those things. So this is a very learning-forward process. Learning used to be fun when we were younger. It can be again. So I want you to really tap back into that joy of learning that you may have had and forgot about when you were younger. All right, so there's only one way to eat an elephant, and that is one bite at a time. Absolutely right. We're going to split that networking beast into its 3 component parts. First is prioritization of targets. Before we spend dozens of hours talking to people, who should we target? Let's spend an hour thinking about that. Once we've identified our targets, we need to reach out to people at those targets. And then once we get those people to respond to us, we need to figure out how do we get them to recommend us for interviews. This is a recipe, and recipes change over time. The talk I gave here in 2019, very different than the talk I'm going to give tonight because the recipe has been improved since then. Ask questions. Be skeptical consumers. Like, test this material. Ask why I didn't do it a different way if that strikes you. There's a remarkable amount I had to cut out of this talk to make it fit 2 hours, but I'm happy to go into more detail on anything you want to know. I just want to know what you have questions about. So can you all agree to ask questions as we go? Don't save them to the end. Be skeptical. I'm skeptical, so that'll work well. Okay, so we're going to kick off talking about prioritization. I'm going to introduce you to the LAMP list. It's the fundamental kind of framework for part 1 of this talk. 70 minutes of due diligence before we spend hours networking with people. Before we talk about LAMP, though, we need to talk about something near and dear to my heart, which is reality television. Do you have any Bachelor fans out here? Thank you, proud Bachelor fans. Nicely done. How many of you are not proud Bachelor fans, but you may have hate watched it once or twice or 10 times? Yeah, changing the channel is really hard. It's a judgment-free zone, though. So there's a gender-flipped version called The Bachelorette and Golden Bachelor and Bachelors in Paradise and a whole thing. We'll just talk about The Bachelor for simplicity's sake. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the show, here's how it works. A bachelor is selected, and 25 bachelorette contestants are furnished for him in a house. Just being real. And each week he picks one or more of the contestants to kick off the show until only one remains, and romance blossoms for a couple of weeks. For those of you who like visual aids, here's a picture of the bachelor, presumably toasting himself. Now, from a game theory perspective, this show fascinates me. Because if you're the bachelor on a show called The Bachelor, you're probably going to win. So hats off to you, sir. That is well played. I don't understand it from the other side of the equation quite as much, though. So think about it in game theory terms. Supply, artificially restricted, just one bachelor. Demand, artificially stimulated, 25 contestants. That's 4% odds out of the gate. There's an opportunity cost. So to go on the show, you've got to give up several months of normal dating. It's a blind purchase, so you don't know who you're fighting over until you show up on the first day. And it's all on national TV, which is a recipe for everyone's worst side. So there's so much bad about this, I can't even call it bad game theory. It's just sort of the absence of game theory. I like to imagine that the contestants on The Bachelor, just like the men on The Bachelorette, are charming and delightful in their normal lives, but anyone in that circumstance is going to look desperate. I call it artificial desperation. You made a bad life decision, and now you're dealing with the consequences on national TV. Good times. Artificial desperation is hilarious when you talk about reality television, but it's heartbreaking when you realize that artificial desperation is the default setting of pretty much every job seeker out there. Every time you apply online, you kind of know you're not going to hear back, but you kind of don't know what else to do, so you do it again and again and again. And after you do that enough times, it takes a toll on your confidence. Once you start emitting desperation into your job search, or really into anything, people don't want to have that much to do with you. I think employers assume how you approach your job search is predictive of how you'll approach the job. Do you treat hope like it's a strategy, or do you have backup plans and other strategies if that doesn't work out? So artificial desperation, we need to eradicate that from our search, and that's what the LAMP list helps do. The easiest way to get over that artificial desperation is to expand your consideration set. Let's brainstorm beyond the easily accessible names in our job search and get a robust list so we can be confident that so we can make ourselves the bachelor in our own search, or the bachelorette, instead of one of 25 contestants over and over and over again. Okay, so here's the LAMP list. Pretty basic, just 4 columns that happen to spell out LAMP, L-A-M-P. So the way we do this in 70 minutes is we embrace 2 pretty core business concepts. The first, 80-20 rule, also known as the Pareto principle. In most systems, you get 80% of your results in just 20% of the time and effort. So we're not going to try to have a perfect employer list because it doesn't really exist, and you're not in a great position to know all of the companies in a space that you like learning about. So we're going to focus on getting a good enough list quickly, and 70 minutes happens to be the right amount of time. Now, the second strategy that we'll embrace is the assembly line. So instead of, when people are not trained to make a company list, they tend to work horizontally. Come up with a company you want to work for. Let's grab some data about them, what alumni work there, any deadlines that they have for postings. But we want to work vertically to get some efficiency on that. Let's brainstorm a lot of companies. And then once we've done that, let's find one piece of data that's easy to find and predictive of success for all of the companies in the list. And then a second piece of data and a third. And then we can sort this. Now, I want you to save this for your custom targets. That's my word for off-campus employers. Employers that are not coming to you to proactively recruit you. So if companies are coming proactively to recruit you, go to their events. Take advantage of that economy of scale. Send good thank you notes, and you're probably pretty good. But for the employers that you wish were recruiting you but are not, this is your best option, is like, let's go to them. Once you've done this list, so we'll brainstorm 40 employers in 40 minutes, find 3 pieces of data with the remaining 30 minutes. We'll use that to identify a top 6, and we'll initiate outreach to those 6 simultaneously so that we are the bachelorette or the bachelor in our own search. So it's a bit of due diligence before we get there. All right, if you follow this recipe, you'll be done by the time we get to number 10. So while we're brainstorming 40 employers, realistically, you're only going to be reaching out to up to 25% of them. Most of them are cannon fodder. Okay, so 40 possibilities in 40 minutes sounds kind of hard. We're going to split that into 4 different brainstorming techniques, 10 minutes each. Now, up to 3 sectors is my recommendation. If you don't know where to start, pick some topics that you enjoy learning about. You learn a ton in your spare time for free. I want to find a way to get you paid for it. So let's start off. Before I explain the first brainstorming technique, I just want you to experience it. So what I want you to do, I'm going to give you 30 seconds. I want you to make a list in front of, put it on your phone, put it on a piece of paper in front of you, put it on your laptop. What I want you to do is write down a list of every employer you wish were coming to recruit you proactively on campus, but they are not, as far as you know. Who do you wish was coming to you so you didn't have to go to them? Don't worry about whether you're qualified or whether they'd be into you. Worry about whether, if they made an offer for the job you want, you'd consider saying yes. Okay, so your 30 seconds starts now. Okay, that's time. Roughly, how many did you come up with? Just shout out some numbers. 3? 4? 5, 6, 7, I'm hearing, okay, middle single digits, it sounds like. For those of you who got 5 or more, typically you have a sector in mind. If you can name it, you can Google it, and some business person before you has made that list. For those of you who struggle to come up with 1 or 2 or 3, we want to do a bright spot analysis. So let's brainstorm around the 1 or 2 that you had readily available. So what's a company that someone was, what if you only came up with a handful, what's one of the smaller companies that you were excited in, but you didn't have like 4 or 5 other names that you could immediately rattle off? Any kind of? Invesco, great. So my 2 favorite techniques for brainstorming beyond those first few companies that come to mind. First, this is an example of the dream employer method. So these are the first companies that came to mind. If you didn't have a rigorous way to make a list, these might be the entirety of your list. So we want to brainstorm beyond them, but they're very likely to end up in your top 6. My favorite way to do this is to use ChatGPT. I mean, AI is great at this thing, like brainstorming companies. So what are 10 US-based companies like Invesco? Okay, and very quickly, it just rattles it off for you. So I love that, and it may not be perfect. I don't know that all that's accurate, but we're looking for a good enough list quickly, and there's nothing faster than that. So absolutely lean into AI for identifying companies that may or may not already be on your radar. If you're comfortable using a PitchBook or a Crunchbase, I like Crunchbase a lot. It's free. You don't need to log in. This is a great way to start brainstorming companies, but definitely lean into AI here. So Crunchbase, I referenced this one. Here's what it looks like. It's an investor website, but I don't use it for investing. So if we go to Invesco, what I like it best for is it gives you some industry names. Let's say that we're interested in it because it is a venture capital company. We see, okay, here's 22,000 VC companies. but we see some of them are, one of them is in Switzerland. Let's say that we want to go to we want to make sure that we're living in California. So show me companies that are based in California. That's now down to 3,000. It keeps giving you the first 5 for free, but I like that it gives you, here's a location, here's a sentence of description, here's a Crunchbase rank, which is kind of a sexiness rating. How up and coming is this company? How much is it growing? How recently has it gotten venture capital funding? They don't really advertise what goes into it, but it's just sort of a growth rating. Now, if you want to see the whole list, you can get the 7-day free. Everything I show you today is going to be free, by the way, because I think it's cruel to ask people who are looking to make money to pay money. But if you keep adding constraints to it, it will keep giving you 5 for free. So I really like having a MICE, mutually exclusive, comprehensively exhaustive metric in here. So I like number of employees. If I want to drill down into these 2,000 or 3,000 more, you know, companies that show up as having 50 to 100 employees won't show up as having 100 to 250. So it keeps giving you 5 different ones. I like that this is a very Tinder-like interface. It will just keep offering you ideas. You swipe right on the ones you like and left on the ones you don't. Part of the way we get to 40 and 40 minutes is we err on the side of inclusion. So if we've never heard of these companies, but it doesn't look like it's a bad fit, add it to your list. So the big names are already going to be on there because they were easily accessible, but the smaller names are what we use to get up to 40. Any questions on the dream employer method? Okay. Our second brainstorming method, these will move a little bit faster, is the alumni method. So go to LinkedIn, look up where KU alumni are currently employed in the spaces that you want to work. Could be cities, could be job titles, and add 10 or more companies in 10 minutes that you didn't already have added to your list. You can use an alumni database for this as well. Third is Indeed. So we're 20 minutes in. We have 20 or more companies. We need to get to at least 40. The max is 100. So it's OK to get more than 10 in 10 minutes. The third brainstorming method is just look at job postings. I like Indeed. You could use LinkedIn Jobs. But don't apply to these job postings because they're black holes. Instead, use them for meta information. These are companies that are looking for people like you right now. So if we are interested, let's add them to our list because there's some urgency around getting in touch with them. If they're looking for people like you, they're hearing from people like you, but from different schools. So look at the postings. If it's good enough, we'll be back to it within 70 minutes. Otherwise, just put the name of the company down and move forward. The fourth method is the trending method. Just read for fun. Whatever reading you do normally, whatever business your news you're consuming. But anytime you come across an employer doing interesting work, that's a potential employer. The harder you have to look to come up with that company's name, the less competition there's going to be for their time and attention. So when a single informational interview will go further with an Nspire Learning than it will with a Google. Because you might be the only person who reached out to that company this year, but the traction you get with an Nspire will help you with Google and vice versa. Okay. If you find any of these methods don't work that well for you, feel free to revert back to one that works better, and AI is always there for you to help you brainstorm more companies. Any questions about the L column of the lamp list? We're drawing the borders of our search here. Now we're just going to color in the lines. So 3 pieces of data. We'll quickly move through these. The first piece of data I want you to grab is alumni. So the first column is yes or no. For each of your 40 or more employers, look up, are there KU alumni currently employed there? This lets us know the company's familiar with your brand. It's easier to be the second KU person at a company than the first one. And that they're willing to pay you enough to get you to work there. So if there's 1 or more, it gets a Y for yes. Otherwise, it gets an N for no. If it sounds tedious, it's because it kind of is. It's a job search, so what can you really expect? My recommendation is pour yourself a glass of wine for those of you of age, and through 10 minutes will be done before you know it. Okay. Next up, motivation. This one only takes 5 minutes, and it's gut feeling only. When you look at a company's name, how excited are you to reach out to them, knowing that the response rate on the email you're going to be sending is about 20%. So you're going to have to kiss a lot of frogs to find your princes in this process. It's going to be a lot easier to try a third or a fourth person at a company if you're pretty psyched about them than at a backup company that you're not really that jazzed about. So I want you to rate each of these companies as a 3, 2, 1, or 0. We're using a concept here called arbitrary coherence. So I don't care what a 2 means to you. I just care that you like your 3s better than your 2s and your 2s more than your 1s. So it's a blended average of everything you know about these companies right now. Give it a 3 if it's your favorite, 2 if it's a mid-tier, 1 if it's a bottom tier. And any company you don't know enough about right now to have an opinion, give it a 0. Don't stop what you're doing and research it. We'll go back to them later once we're done filling in this list. That's how we get it done in 5 minutes. So gut feeling only, 3, 1, 2, 0, 1, 2, and so on until you're done. Any questions about that? Feel free to toss in a 0.5 if you need to split a tie. But the faster you go, the more accurate your relative ratings will be. Final column is postings. So this, go for each one of your companies, use LinkedIn Jobs or use Indeed. I like Indeed personally. Look up their current job postings. So based on the best posting you see, if it's very relevant, give it a 3. If it's somewhat relevant, it's a 2. And if it's not relevant, there's no relevant hiring, it's a 1. So what we're doing here is approximating urgency. If you are looking for an internship in finance and they have finance internships, that's a 3 out of 3. Perfect fit. They're hearing from a lot of other people looking for finance internships. So if we want to get in touch with, if we want to get an interview with them, we got to move now. So that's a 3. If they don't have any internships, but they have full-time offers, that's somewhat relevant. It means they'll have a pipeline of need. They're just not advertising those jobs yet. So that would be a 2 out of 3. Not quite as time sensitive as an internship posting, but still, it lets you know they're looking for people like you. And a 1 out of 3 is no relevant hiring. So just approximate how time sensitive is it that we get an advocate at that company, 3, 2, or 1. Okay, here's a question for you. Let's say you're looking at like startups. Startups aren't going to be posting jobs on Indeed or LinkedIn Jobs. So what's another way we could approximate urgency for getting an advocate at a company? Any other thoughts? Or any thoughts on how we might do that? How do we know which startups are more time sensitive than other ones? Yeah. Try to contact someone at the company, see how responsive they are, and the idea being if they're more responsive if they have a bigger need, they'll probably be more responsive. That's a great thought. I hadn't thought of that one. The approach I like here is how recently have they gotten a new round of funding. So if they've gotten venture capital funding in the last 3 months, they're in hiring mode. So we can look that information up. It's readily accessible to us. That would be a 3 out of 3 if it's been in the last 3 months. Longer than 3 months, but shorter than a year. 2 out of 3, it's somewhat urgent. They probably hit steady state. Or but they may still have some money floating around for an internship or a brand new hire. Then if it's been longer than a year, there's no particular urgency about getting an advocate at that company. So 1 out of 3. So think figuratively. If these postings don't work for you, there might be another way to tap into how urgent a particular target is. All right, that's it. Now we've got all the raw data. Let's sort this list. The ability to keep trying people, even if the first few people ignore you, that's what drives this process forward. So motivation comes first. Our second most important criteria, I would argue, would be urgency. So if we're equally excited about all of these companies, let's start with the ones that have the most relevant job postings first. And then our tiebreaker is the presence of alumni. This is what the data says our top 6 should be, but at the end of as much as I want to make this process rational, like any good engineer would, the heart wants what it wants. So now that we're anchored by data, let's override that data for intuition. Are those 6 really our top 6? Or are there companies lower on the list that we wish were higher up? So a few places I would look. Company number 7, the only reason it's in 7th place instead of 6, so it's going to be we're going to focus on those top 6 for a few weeks before we move on to number 7 and 8. But number 7, Play First, the only reason it's at position number 7 is because it's alphabetically behind Institute of Play at number 6. If you have a preference of one over the other, go ahead and change the motivation from a 3 to a 4. Resort the list and it will jump to the top. So the motivation column is the fudge factor column. It's what you use to force whatever you want into your top 6. I just want to make sure you're anchored by data before you override it with intuition. Typically, when people aren't taught to make a company list, you start with intuition and data never really factors into it. But now that we're anchored by data, we can do whatever we want with it. Second place I recommend checking is that 3 to 2 cutoff. So number 14, Inkling Games. It's the highest ranking company that is not, it's down that far because its motivation is 2, but it's got a job posting. If your top 6 wasn't full of job postings, like Institute of Play, are we more excited about that company, which we're more excited about, but it doesn't have a relevant internship posting? Or are we more excited by a company that we're a little less excited about, but it's got an internship posting? Up to you which one you'd prioritize. If you're really motivated by internship postings, you would change that motivation from a 2 to a 4, and it jumps to the top of your list. And down at the bottom, you don't need to research all of these unknown companies like Inspire Learning, but this one has a job posting, so let's spend a minute, Google it. We find out it's an edutainment company based in Austin, Texas. If you know you could never live in Texas, that's fine. Change that motivation from a 0 to a 1. It falls at the bottom forever. But if you like it, change it from a 0 to a 3 or a 4. You literally might be the only person who reaches out to do an informational meeting with them proactively. And that reflects very positively on you, and the traction you get there will help you at some of the bigger firms. Once you look at this list and say, yeah, my top 6 are my top 6, I like them a lot. 7, 8, and 9 are good, but not enough to kick any of my top 6 out of the top 6. And anything below number 10, I'll talk to you never. If I get bored on a Friday night, I'll apply online. Then you're done with this process. So this is meant to be quick and dirty and something you can walk away from easily if your goals change. Any questions about the lamp list before we move on? All right, let's recap this section. Big takeaways. Be the bachelor or the bachelorette in your own search. You are not the commodity in this process. There are way more companies than there are you. You are just one person, so play the companies off one another so they can't play you off of one another. The easiest way to do that, just spend a concerted hour being strategic and brainstorm in a systematic way. Don't try for a perfect list. It doesn't exist. Be good enough quickly. AI makes this so easy right now. Take advantage of that. An 80-20 list is good enough to get you started. We just want to know a top 6. We'll learn stuff from them, and that will help us understand if we're on the right path or if we need to tweak it a little bit. And don't start with intuition because you'll finish with intuition. Start with data and then override the data for intuition once you're anchored appropriately. As a result of this, we've identified our top 6 and we'll initiate outreach to them simultaneously in part 2 so we can be the bachelor. So we'll cover that step next, but I've got a question for you quickly. What is the correct sort order of a lamp list? So alumni motivation and postings, which is most important? Motivation, yep. Your willingness to get ignored by people but keep trying drives the process forward. What's second most important? Postings, yeah, urgency. They've got a need right now, let's move now. And alumni will be our tiebreaker. Nice job. All right, so let's do part 2. This is the stuff that's exciting to me because I'm awkward. So how do we reach out to strangers in an effective way? So the most common complaint I get from strangers at this point, or I get from job seekers at this point is, what if contacts don't respond? Actually, let's back up a bit. I'm gonna... So before we get into reaching out to people, let's take a step back. The first thing we need to do, so we've got our top 6 identified, but we need to figure out who are the people we want to be reaching out to. So I recommend identifying 2 starter contacts. The response rate to your outreach emails is going to be about 20% post-COVID. So I used to, we're going to be networking with current employees. We don't want to network with ex-employees because they tend to leave for a reason. What do you think is the most important factor when choosing who to reach out to? Who is most likely to be helpful in your search? Any guesses? Yeah. Alumni is great. And when I wrote the book initially, that was what I recommended above all else. Go for alumni. They sympathize with you. You share an affinity with them. I found out that was not the factor that most strongly correlated with being helpful in one's search. There was another factor that weighed more heavily. Any guesses? Yeah.
People close to your age.
People close to your age, interesting, yes. You're more likely to get responses from people closer to you, but they don't necessarily have the social capital to spend on your behalf to help you get an interview. So it's kind of are we going for responses or are we going for advocacy? But we will talk about what's the sweet spot in terms of levels to go after. I like where your head's at. You're on the right track. What do you think?
Personal contact.
Personal contacts, I love that. If we have a mutual connection, that's also good. We'll talk about that though. That kind of is a double-edged sword when you have a shared contact or when you knew them from your past life. Existing contacts are tricky. The answer to this is not obvious, but functionally relevant. So if you want to do marketing, you got to talk to people in marketing. I don't care if they're alumni or not. I'd rather they be from that other Kansas school down the road and be in marketing rather than be in finance and be from KU. because if you are, again, if you focus on learning, you will get job leads. If you focus on job leads, you get neither. So when you reach out to do an informational meeting with someone in a different job, you don't really care about what they do. You're not really trying to learn about how to do their job well. You might be trying to learn about the culture, but that's, they can only talk for so long about that. So we want to reach out to people who have the job you want one day, because they will make you smarter and that will make your job search much easier. Now, I'm often asked, like, well, should I reach out to HR? I recommend reaching out to HR if you want to do HR. That's great. They're functionally relevant. If you don't want to do HR, the times that I recommend reaching out to HR are if a job posting or somebody's LinkedIn profile tells you to do so. Usually that's going to be for startups that are in hiring mode. They'll say, contact me if you're interested in working for us. If so, following instructions is very likable. Do that. The other reason you'd reach out to HR is if somebody in your function of interest directs you to do so. That's a referral. That's what we're going for in this process. We want to get referred to HR because then they'll do a screening interview with us. So functional relevance is the most important factor, and then we get to some factors that are all nice to haves but not as important as that one. So I like people who are about 1 to 2 levels above where you'd start. So the inclination when you start doing proactive networking with strangers is to reach out to people who just graduated. And it makes sense, they're sympathetic. However, they're still like keeping their head down. They haven't gotten their first promotions. They're not feeling all that confident yet. They don't want to incur risk or stick their neck out for somebody else when they're still trying to get that first promotion themselves. So it's just, they're sympathetic, but they're not necessarily helpful in getting you an interview. So I like 1 to 2 levels above where you'd start with a minimum tenure of about 1.5 years. So they've been through a cycle at least. I like people who are alumni. That's another nice to have. If you're a transitioning veteran, like that's an affinity group. That's also great. So people who are from your home country, people that you have something else in common with, that's a nice to have. This one is my favorite though. Of the second tier of traits, I like people who are internally promoted. They've gone from marketing associate to senior marketing associate, or marketing manager to marketing director. They're feeling more comfortable with their spot at the company because the company liked them well enough to give them more money and more responsibility. So they're feeling more confident. If they like a job seeker, they're more at peace with advocating for them. So these are the criteria that I like looking at. Let's go through an example on LinkedIn. So I would look up these people on LinkedIn. Here's how I would go about doing that. Okay, so this is LinkedIn. Note here it says try premium for free. I am a proud basic member of LinkedIn. I'm proudly basic in a lot of ways, but I'm a proud basic member of LinkedIn. Everything you need to do in LinkedIn you can do for free. So have any of you ever been search limited by LinkedIn? Has that happened to any of you? I'm seeing hands in the back. Yeah, it's pretty awful. What happens there is when you do a search, it will only show you the first 2 or 3 results for free, and then it blurs everything out and says you need to pay us money. And they're not talking about like the job seeker level. They're talking like the sales navigator level, which is like $150 a month. It's crazy. So the best way to look up contacts at companies that you want to approach is, this is not intuitive. So watch this closely. Click on the search box at the top. Don't type anything into it. Just click in the box and hit enter. That's going to bring up this ribbon at the top, so the filters ribbon. Click on all filters. It will usually default to people. That's the one we want. But I'm going to use the example of IDEO. It's the design consulting firm. They make the shopping cart of the future. So I want current employees. So show me people who are currently employed at IDEO. It will auto-complete that. And then show me, okay, we've got 1,300 people that work at IDEO that admit to working at IDEO on LinkedIn. So what was the most important criteria when choosing contacts? Remind me? Functional relevance. Yeah, so we want to find people who are doing the job we want. Most recently, before I became a career coach, I was a marketer. So let's go back to all filters. Scroll to the bottom. There's a slot here, a field called title. So if you want to do marketing, put in marketing. If you want to do finance, put in finance. If you want to do product management, put in product, or a similar word. If you type in a word here, it only searches job titles. If you type in a word up here, it will search the whole profile. So if you want to find people who worked on Xbox while at Microsoft, you might search it at the top because that searches their whole profile for it. If you want to just search for job titles, look at title. Okay, so now we're down to 26 results. So we're looking for people who are 1 to 2 levels up and ideally internally promoted, but we don't get to see that from this screen. What we see on this screen is top level information. We see a job title, Global Marketing Director, and a location. As we look through this, we can kind of get a sense for who's 1 to 2 levels up based on the job titles we see. So Global Marketing Executive, we see Product Marketing, Brand Marketing, Senior Marketing Communications Specialist, which means there's a Marketing Communications Specialist below them. There's a co-head, Content Marketing, a Marketing Lead. So you can kind of start getting a sense for who's more junior, who's more senior based on the pictures and the job titles that you see. Again, AI is great at this. If you're trying to figure out like what are the levels of promotion at IDEO, ask it what are the promotion levels at IDEO for a marketing professional, and it will list them out for you. It's pretty good at that. Now, if you were search limited, what would happen here is it would just show you the top 3 and then blur everything else out. So we're looking through these people. Okay, so we see like a Sarah Quadraro. I'm a second degree connection with her, so maybe she would be one of the people I'd want to reach out to. So now we see, okay, Virginia Martinez is a mutual connection, so conventional wisdom tells you LinkedIn's great, like secondary connections, reach out, it shows you who you know and who they know. The only problem, I could theoretically reach out to Virginia and ask her to connect me with Sarah, but the problem is I haven't talked to Virginia in like 9 years. So if I were to, if I went directly to Sarah and said I'm a friend of Virginia, and she goes to Virginia and says, what do you think of Steve? Virginia will say something, oh, Steve is great, when I last spoke to him back in the 90s. So that's weird. So I would need to like try to revive my relationship with Virginia, and if she's open to that, then try to get her to introduce me to Sarah. But it might be 9 years since she's talked to Sarah as well. So it's the longer you're on LinkedIn, the more out of date your connections become. I don't like second degree connections all that much unless it's someone that you can send a text message to and expect a response back from. So if a second degree connection isn't a great option, what are our options? So I want to find 2 contacts per company because with a 20% response rate, I'm probably going to need a second person. But let's say Sarah is my first one, the first one I go after. Now, whenever you see follow, that you can still reach out to people and connect with them, but I don't want you connecting with strangers. What will often happen is your connection request gets ignored or it gets accepted and never replied to. So save connection requests for a follow-up attempt. So if we're not going to connect with Sarah and we're not going to use an outdated second degree connection, what are our options for getting in touch with her? Have any of you, do any of you belong to LinkedIn groups? Okay, I'm seeing some nods here. I recommend LinkedIn groups. So if you share a LinkedIn group with someone, it will often show up in a highlights box, but not always. If you don't see a highlights box at the top, scroll to the bottom of your list, of their profile. And you'll see groups as an option in their interests. Sometimes they block it or they hide it, so you won't be able to see it. But if they belong to groups, often there's a groups box. Show me all of Sarah's groups. And we see she belongs to a few dozen here. Circular Design, Marketing and Communication Network, Social Media Marketing Group has like 2.5 million people in it. I happen to belong to TED Ideas Worth Spreading Unofficial because I like TED Talks. Heck no, they're like 12 minutes long. Who has that kind of time? I belong to it because there's like 1.5 million people that are kind of in the business space, which is my sweet spot. So I saw that people I was trying to reach out to belonged to this group, and I joined that group. Why did I bother joining that group? You could follow conversation topics in that group if you're so inclined, but I like it for a different reason. If you click on this group that you share with someone, and then you look them up in the Show All Members section, we're looking for Sarah Quadraro. We now get a new option called Message. Click on that, and now we can message her directly. So we don't need to pay for InMail. We can do this free 15 times per calendar month. So use all 15 of them would be my recommendation because it's easy and it goes to people. It's not because everybody checks their group messages, but people who check their group messages are disproportionately likely to be helpful in your job search. So that's why I like this strategy so much for a first outreach attempt. So my recommendation, let's back up a step though. Let's say that we didn't share a group with Sarah. What could we do looking through her groups? If we didn't belong to any of these groups, what could we do? Join a group. I like where your head's at. Absolutely. You can belong to, I think, 75 groups at one time. And no, they have no way of knowing how recently you joined that group. But I would be joining things that had 2.5 million people because it gives me free access to 2.5 million people that are in a space that I care about. It's also useful for signaling. Lets people know these are the topics that I enjoy learning about. So join all the groups. Join functional job function groups, join city groups, join sector groups that you find interesting, but it makes your outreach a lot easier. Okay, so if Sarah did not belong to any groups, let's say that, but we still wanted to get in touch with her, that we need to find some contact information for her. So sometimes people will put contact information in their profile section. Sometimes it will be in their about. Not in this case for Sarah. But sometimes people will put direct email addresses. We see a personal website there. That might be useful. It probably has a contact box there. Have any of you ever tried Googling email addresses for people? Seeing some nods. How has that worked for you with a hand gesture? Yeah, meh is the correct answer. Yeah, there's a reason for this. If you look up the @ symbol in Google, it doesn't allow searches on the @ symbol. It'll screen out the @ symbol and just give you information on IDEO rather than @ideo.com, presumably to stop spammers from harvesting email addresses off the internet. Kind of like what we're trying to do here now. So that's too bad. Thankfully, Yahoo has no such reservations. You can Yahoo the @ symbol all day, which is the first time someone's told you to Yahoo anything in about 25 years. Thankfully, I'm not cruel. I'm not going to ask you to do that. I'm just going to show you a website that does it for you. That website is called hunter.io. Hunter is lovely. So this is Hunter. So what Hunter is, it's just an email finding engine. So we say, I'm looking for people at IDEO. It says, this IDEO? We say yes. And what it will do is show us, OK, we think the formula for that company is first initial last name at ideo.com. Then it shows you the examples it came up with to come up with that conclusion. So what I like about this, again, it's free. This is a free plan. You can see you get 25 free searches per month and 50 free verifications. So once we think we have the formula, we can take it into a verifier. Say S, it's first initial last name, Sarah Quadrado at ideo.com. Hit verify. And it says that's invalid. You'll get a bounce back if you try that email because I misspelled her last name. So let's make it Quadraro. And here we see all green lights. So an email will go through to that address. I don't know if it's going to go to Sarah. It might go to Sean Quadraro, her husband in accounting. But if I send him an email addressed to Sarah, I like to assume he's a stand-up guy and would forward it along. But you get what you pay for. This is free. It allows you to just not get bounce-back emails, which is a little bit frustrating. But largely, I want you to rely on group messages whenever you can. They're your best first approach. If you don't have access to those, this is your next best option. We're at a point where email addresses are not rocket science. Like it's going to be first initial last name or first name dot last name for most companies. So you don't really have to worry about people getting really suspicious. How did you find this email? First initial last name, man. It's not that hard. I'm not Sherlock Holmes. So typically, if people get upset for you for contacting them at their work address, they probably weren't going to be helpful in your job search anyway. So that's it on Google stalking today. Probably not a topic you thought we were covering, but kind of an important one. You need to be able to get information from people. So just to recap this section, LinkedIn groups, use those whenever possible. It's your best return on investment to try to get in touch with people. If you want to recap how to do that, here's a link where I write it out. Finding an email address is your next best option. It could be on hunter.io. It could be in an alumni database, so don't forget about that if you're reaching out to KU alums. Save your invitation to connect for a follow-up attempt. That's if you use it as a first attempt, you don't really have a way to follow up on it. And don't use secondary connections unless it's somebody you can text and get a response back from. Any questions about contact finding? Yes?
I noticed you didn't suggest just calling the company and asking for it. Is there a reason for that?
People hate using the phone, like I've found. So we all get really weird. It's sort of a lost art. I'm not opposed to it. I think there's some scrappiness. If you want to get in touch with somebody, you can't find contact information for them. It's really up to you. That's why I want you to start with companies that are really highly motivating. So if you get stuck, calling the company is a totally good option. If you're looking at startups, absolutely look at the website. The smaller the company is, the more likely they have direct email addresses posted on the internet because they're trying to develop business. So this is just sort of a recipe to start with, a good basic algorithm. But if you're so motivated to call the company, if you're at that point, you're just stumped, absolutely do it. My recommendation would be, most of these people are going to ignore you, so don't worry about it too much. Pick the person who's easy to get in touch with. They have an email address. You have a group that you share with them. They might not be as perfect in terms of all the other metrics, but they're easy to contact. And it's really a crapshoot with a 20% odds of success. So focus on, if you get stumped, you're like, oh, this person's good, but they're not great, but they're easy to get in touch with. Start there. You'll have some downtime waiting for them to get back to you. While you have downtime, it's a good time to look for other contacts. Yes?
This is probably getting a little bit ahead, but if you do follow up the connect on LinkedIn, what are you doing at that point? Like, is it just merely to have that connection, or are you actually doing anything else on LinkedIn?
Yeah, so a good question. If you are following up with them on LinkedIn, what are we doing this for? So the goal here is to get them into a real-time conversation. We want to get an informational meeting with them because to get somebody's help, you need to activate it with a real-time interaction so they know that they can trust you. So we'll talk about how to do the informational in part 3. Right now, it's about getting them to agree to an informational. So we've talked about finding contacts. Now let's talk about the email that we're going to send to them. Yeah.
So on LinkedIn, what's the difference between messaging through a LinkedIn group versus like connecting with a note?
Yeah, a good question. What's the difference between connecting through a LinkedIn group versus connecting through a connection request? When you approach people through a LinkedIn group, it provides the subject line for you. A fellow member of the LinkedIn Sports Apparel group has sent you a message. So it lets them know that you are not spamming them. It gives all of your biographical information. They can click on a link to see your profile. The problem with connection requests is, like, if you hit accept on the connection request, it kind of gets tucked into a different place. Like, the message is not as readily retrievable as it is initially. So I like going with a group message. There are some old-fashioned people out there on LinkedIn who don't want to connect with people that they don't personally know. And LinkedIn has a little box. If you don't know this person, you can report them. So group messages, I like that you're just like, hey, we have an affinity. We both share an interest in this topic. I wanted to ask you some questions about your experience. For whatever reason, it doesn't really even make much sense to me. It just seems if you reach out to someone with a connection request, it is often accepted and ignored, or it's ignored entirely. I think because it's so easy and a lot of spam comes through that route, that people just sort of filter it out. They'll accept the connection request whenever I don't accept connection requests until I'm ready to respond to the message if they sent me a message. But I'm pretty disciplined about my LinkedIn interactions. A lot of people will hit accept on the connection request and plan on going back for the message later. And they never get back to going for the message. Other things happen and it loses its urgency. So I think the group message, it's kind of unique. You don't get a ton of those. And in fact, you don't get many of them at all, but you get a lot of connection requests. So it stands out and it's easier to follow up with a message. But for whatever reason, I like to attribute everything to data. And this one doesn't have data. It's just anecdotes. It just seems like when you send a connection request as your first attempt, it's unlikely to get a meaningful response. And it also gives you no reasonable way to follow up on it. If you send a group message and that doesn't get a response, you still have your invitation to connect. You can send that as your follow-up attempt, and that tends to produce pretty good results. Yeah, for whatever, I think it's just weird if you go from the invitation to connect and then your follow-up attempt is to their work email. It's a little bit more personal. If you go to the more personal route first and then your backup is the easy kind of connection request, it just seems to be easier all around and produce a better response rate. Was there another question? Yes?
Should you not rely on recruiters to connect with recruiters?
Yeah, so that's a question I get. Like, what are recruiters doing if they're not helping connect me to someone who's doing the job that I want? Recruiters are doing a ton, and they're doing it for like 20 or 30 positions instead of just this particular one. So they don't really have a list of people who have raised their hand and say, connect job seekers to me. So often, if they did have that list, it would not be something that got them promoted. So you'd be kind of giving them work like, here, can you connect me to someone who knows more about this topic? it's work that's not going to get them promoted. It will take them time to find somebody who's available to talk to you, and you could have just gone to them yourself. So it tends not to be a very positive return on investment activity. We'll put it that way. You can just go directly to them. It shows more proactivity and assertiveness on your part. And if you get referred to HR, they're suddenly very motivated to help you. But if you go directly to them, they're kind of like, ugh, I got to do something with this. Maybe, oh, I'm busy right now. I'll answer it next week. Oh, I'm busy this week too. I'll get to it next week. And then it just disappears from their radar. So it just tends not to get a very positive response. You don't tend to get a lot of help. Good question. In the back, yes? If you message somebody through a group, you don't have to write a subject line to that email because it provides it for you. A fellow member of the blank group has sent you a message, is what the subject line will say. So you don't really need to identify yourself as a group member. The subject line already did that. So I like it. It writes your subject line for you. Less work for you. So another reason why I like groups. Good question. All right, so let's talk about the email itself. All right, the most common complaint I get from job seekers at this point is like, Steve, I've tried networking with people. It doesn't work, man. They won't respond. And I agree. Some people will never respond to you. I call these people curmudgeons. They are awful people. They hate babies. They kick puppies. They are the worst people ever. Or they're delightful people who just have no interest or time to help you find a job. It makes no difference to you because either way they're ignoring you. So make up whatever backstory you like. They're not the worst segment you'll encounter though because they're clear about not being helpful. You email them, they ignore you. You follow up with them, they ignore you again, and you're done. The worst group is the second group, a group I call obligates. I call them that because they are motivated by a sense of obligation. They've probably gotten help in the past in their job search and they want to do enough to simulate paying it forward so they don't lose face. But they don't actually want to incur the risk and inconvenience of advocating for people. So obligates do things like this. They will respond to you sometimes, but not other times. And when they respond, they'll take a very long time to do so. They'll set up a meeting with you, but then cancel at the last minute, get really weird about rescheduling. Or they'll schedule you for 3 months from now. Or say, I'm really busy right now, reach back out to me in February, and I'll have more time to talk then. So they're dangerous because they take all of your time and your hope and your energy and they crush it. So it's critical we have a way to move past the curmudgeons and the obligates to get to the one positive return segment, which is a group I call boosters. They say things like, man, job search is terrible. Been there. If you ask me for help, you automatically get my time. I know what you're going through. So boosters are going to be, it's marketing 101. If you only have one profitable segment, you better market your product to the one profitable segment. So everything I teach you from this point forward is designed to cater to the preferences of boosters. Unfortunately, they're only about 20% of the population. So we're going to have to kiss frogs to find princes. And unfortunately, again, there's no checkbox in LinkedIn that says, hi, I'm a booster, start here. I'm a curmudgeon, don't even bother. So we need to figure out who is who. Anyone have any ideas of how we might be able to differentiate? By taking a guess from just what we see in LinkedIn or what we see when we send a message, any ideas what might predict for us if someone's going to be a booster rather than a curmudgeon or an obligate? Any ideas? Yeah. Yeah, so a lot of connections. I like seeing that. Anything else? Yeah.
Maybe they make a lot of posts.
Yeah, activity level. So they're posting a lot. I like, and they belong to groups. That's good. They have a professional photo. I like that one too. For me, the most important criteria to use when identifying who is who, I would say, is response time. So I think if people respond within 3 business days, they probably know they're being helpful. If they take longer than 3 business days, I think they kind of know they're not being all that helpful because they're kind of running clock out on you. So that's going to be how I define boosters. They are going to be people who respond to what I call a 6-point email, which I'll show you a couple slides from now. It's a high efficiency outreach email targeted to boosters specifically. Boosters are people who tend to respond to that email within 3 business days. So hold that thought. We'll come back to it in a little bit. Let's talk about the email itself first. How do we craft an email that appeals to people who might be sympathetic to our job search? Okay. So boosters, they're not ready to advocate for us. We need to activate their advocacy. The way that we do that is through a real-time conversation. So phone or Zoom or in person, but usually it's going to be phone or Zoom. So how do we get them on the phone? Now, have any of you ever been told to sell yourself in your job search? Okay, I'm seeing some nods. Yeah, I think we've all been told that. So here's your thought exercise. Pick your favorite company from the ones I had you brainstorm in part 1. So look at your list, pick your favorite company from that batch, and then pick somebody with a job title that's like 1 or 2 levels above where you would start. Once you've got that job title and that company in mind, here's your thought exercise. I want you to draft an email, outreach email to them where you sell yourself. Tell them why they should do an informational meeting with you. So I'll give you 30 seconds to do this. Don't write it word for word. Just think of what points you'd be sure to mention in this outreach email to convince them to do an informational meeting with you. Your 30 seconds starts now. Okay, that's time. How did that go for you? Pretty easy, pretty straightforward? Pretty awkward, pretty uncomfortable? Okay, I saw some nods for the latter. Why would that possibly be awkward or uncomfortable? For those of you who felt that way. For some of you, it was totally fine doing this. If so, I'm jealous. You can just keep doing you. But for those of you who found this uncomfortable, why would it be uncomfortable? Yes, thank you.
Like the first time you're ever told to sell yourself. Every other time it's like, be humble, don't sell yourself.
Yeah, hey stranger, you don't know me, here's why I'm awesome. Like, is not an email that we are really writing that much these days, which is good because it's super awkward. So sell yourself, I wish that advice would die in a fire, but people keep repeating it, so we need to address it. There's a time and a place for it. The time and a place for it is during an interview, and not even at the start of a job interview, but more towards the midway point. But that's a topic for another day. So sell yourself, it's this outdated concept that just lives this zombified life. It keeps coming up, but it's just not that effective when you're trying to get strangers to interact with you. So that's not how instructions work, though. I can't just tell you what not to do. I have to tell you what to do instead. So my former colleague at Fuqua, Dan Ariely, wrote this book called Predictably Irrational. He had an experiment in here. I'm going to tell you the experiment. There were 3 options in the experiment. As I'm talking you through it, I want you to think of which option you think would be most effective. So Dan had an experimenter trying to move a couch out of a moving van. They couldn't move it themselves. They'd ask random people passing by in a city street if they'd be willing to help under one of 3 conditions. The first condition was this: excuse me, can you help me move this couch? I can't do it myself. Option 2, excuse me, can you help me move this couch? I can't do it myself. All I've got is $5 on me, but if you can help me, it's yours. Option 3, excuse me, can you help me move this couch? I can't do it myself. I've got $50 on me. It's what I need, what I'd pay a mover, but I need the help right now. So option 1, 2, or 3, I'll take a quick show of hands. Option 1 is offering nothing. Option 2, offering $5. Option 3, offering $50. Who thinks option 1 was the most effective approach? Okay, smattering. Okay, who thinks that option 2, offering $5, was the most effective approach? About 2 or 3 times as many, okay. And who thinks option 3, offering $50, is the best approach? The majority of the room, the economists, excellent. So 3 findings of the study. Economists in the room, you'll be not surprised to hear. Paying people a lot of money is a great way to get them to do things. That's how economies work. So that's the most successful approach. Second finding of the study, offering nothing at all was just as effective as offering $50, but you saved yourself $50 in the process. So kudos to those, the smattering of you that picked option 1. And third finding of the study, offering $5 was far less successful than either of the other 2 approaches. So when Dan plotted out the success curve of the study, he found there was an ambient success rate at nothing, at $0, a steep drop-off whenever any compensation was provided, and a slow climb back up to parity when market wage was hit. So why would anyone in their right mind say yes for $0? To be helpful, it's a good deed. Yeah, karma, like it feels good to help others in need. That's what motivates us to do good works. What he found is as soon as you offer compensation, it's not about a good deed plus $5. The good deed goes out the window, and it's purely an hourly wage calculation. So he called this shifting from social norms to market norms. The big takeaway here is if you are going to offer compensation, it better be credible compensation. It better be at the $50 level instead of the $5 level. So My entire life was told to sell myself in my job search, but I realized when I heard the study that I was offering $5 to move a couch over and over and over again. It would be much more effective for me to just ask for a favor rather than sell myself. So let's try this exercise again. Same thought experiment. This time what I want you to do, don't sell yourself, just ask for the gift of this person's time and knowledge. So same 30 seconds, don't write it out word for word, mentally draft that email in your head and make any notes of points you'd be sure to hit. We'll talk about that shortly. Your 30 seconds starts now. Okay, that is time. How did that one go? Easier or harder? Why? Oops. Tell me more about that. Yeah.
Because you've asked people for favors before, like just all the time in your life.
Yeah, like it's pretty straightforward. You're not trying to impress them. You're just kind of saying what you are genuinely thinking, which is, can you help me out? Do you think this is a longer email or a shorter email than the sell yourself version? Shorter, yeah. There's just not that many ways to ask for a favor, but it's a lot more authentic. You're not trying to brag to a total stranger. So you've spent about 30 seconds thinking about this email. I've spent over a decade obsessing over this email over and over again, which means I'm a lot of fun at parties. So I'm going to share with you the 10,000th prototype of this email. It's called the 6-point email. So this is based on the original, first developed. I started developing this in 2010, I think. So originally it was the 5-point email. So in the 2012 edition of the book, that's what you'll see it called. And then one of the points, it didn't really matter if it was included or not, so it became the 4-point email for a long time. And then inflation happened, and we're up to the 6-point email. So that's just how the world works, I guess. But here's the original. I want you to do I call it this because there are 6 points that make it what it is. Each point is designed to remove a reason why a booster specifically might not respond to our outreach. So I don't care about obligates and curmudgeons. I'm trying to get the attention of boosters. So here it is. Subject line, your product management experience at Waymo. Hi, Jeff. I'm Becca, a fellow MBA, due class of 24. May I chat with you briefly about your product management experience at Waymo? I'm trying to learn more about product management in the autonomous vehicle space, so your insights would be greatly appreciated. What do you think one of the 6 points is? What looks like it was done on purpose here? Yes?
Letting them know you're a student.
Yes. More specifically, from the same school. In this case, you have the same degree, not the same school. But if you went to the same school, yeah, put your connection first. Let them know you're not spamming them. Absolutely right. Sometimes it's you heard them on a podcast, or you read an article where they were interviewed or they were quoted. State your connection first, whatever that connection might be. What else? Yeah.
You're knowledge seeking first.
What's that?
You're knowledge seeking first.
You're knowledge seeking first. You're asking about insight and advice and knowledge. What are you not asking for?
A job.
Jobs, yeah. So you may wonder, how do they know I'm looking for a job if I don't tell them I'm looking for a job? Trust me, they know you're looking for a job when you send an email like this. Nobody sends emails like this for fun. At least I hope not, because that's really messed up. So they know what you're doing. To make it explicit, it's a weird quirk of American culture. We're very direct most of the time, but we're very indirect on 2 topics. One is the job search. The other is negative feedback, like the sandwich. Here's something nice. Here's why we're having the meeting, though, and here's another nice thing. So it's a really, we're goofy. Any other? What else looks like it was done on purpose?
The specific experience and industry.
Yeah, so there's a genre experience, a specific sphere of interest. So product management in the autonomous vehicle space. So it gives them a genre. Here's what I'm trying to learn more about, and we'll talk more about why that's so powerful shortly. Anything else? Yes.
The subject line is about their experience.
Yeah, the subject line is about the reader of the email, not the writer of the email. And this is one of the newer points. So we want at least half the word count to be about the reader, not the sender of this email. So that way they can be more confident the conversation we're asking for is going to be more about them than our job search. Absolutely right. Got most of them. Yeah, what more?
Phrasing it as a question, not a statement.
Yes. So we're making our ask in the form of a question ending in a question mark. This is one of the newer points that made it the 6-point email. A lot of people were saying, I was wondering if you might have some time to chat about your product management experience at Waymo, period. But it makes it a harder email for us to kind of process when there's no call to action, there's no question mark. That's nice. You were wondering that, but like, what do you want from me? Oh, you want to know if we can do a conversation. That's just ask if you want that conversation. So we hit most of them. Keep the email short. This is 46 words long. Keep it under 75 would be my guidance. Short emails are easier for you to produce in larger quantities, and with a 20% response rate, we're going to be sending a few of these. But they also enable shorter responses. So if I get this email, I can send you a 5-word response. Tell me sometimes you're available on my iPhone while I'm waiting to check out at the supermarket. If you send me the 300-word cover letter style outreach email, I can't send you a 5-word response without looking kind of like a jerk. So I'll think, oh, I'll answer this more fully when I get back to my desk tomorrow, but I get back to my desk tomorrow and work happens and the urgency is lost. So short emails are easier for people to process and allow shorter responses. If you have a connection to them, state it up front. Could be a school you share, a degree you share, an affinity group that you share. It could be an article or media that you saw them in. Put that up front. Ask for experience and insight, not job leads. They know you're looking for job leads, but for whatever reason, we in America think it's rude to make that explicit. Make your ask in the form of a question ending in a question mark. Very good. At least half the word count should be about the reader, not the sender. It sends a very mixed message when, it used to be a 100-word email, but people would get the ask done in like 40 words. And they'd use the remaining 50 words to say, and here's a little bit about me. But the problem is that sends a very mixed message about who the conversation is going to be about. I'd love to know about your knowledge and experience, and 80% of the word count's about my job search or my background. So they will ask, interested is interesting. The easiest way to get people interested in your search is to take a genuine interest in them. So you are a cipher. If you want them to have background information with you, I don't send resumes to strangers. You probably know that. My recommendation would be put your LinkedIn shortcut in your signature file. If you're not sending the message through LinkedIn. If you're sending it through LinkedIn, they will be able to click on your profile and see your information. But if you're sending it through your email, put your LinkedIn shortcut in your signature file. That way they can, if they want to know more about you, they can click on the link and get your direct profile. Especially if your name's like Kevin Lee. There are like 3,500 Kevin Lees on LinkedIn. Last time I checked. It's going to be hard to find you if you don't provide that direct link. And provide a genre of interest. This is the trickiest one. This was the last of the original 5 points of the 5-point email. So I was sending this during the 08 financial crisis. It used to just be that first sentence. So even shorter email, even easier to produce. And what we'd get would be responses like this. I'm sorry, we've got a hiring freeze at Waymo, but good luck with your search. When we started providing a genre of interest, we got more helpful engagement. Like, I'm sorry, we've got a hiring freeze at Waymo, but you're probably also looking at Argo AI and Lucid Motors, maybe Tesla. Like, I'm still happy to chat. Let me know if you want to talk. So you can get engagement from people even if they have a hiring freeze. And if anyone ever says their company's not an option, but they still offer to talk, always take that call. Gives you the opportunity to earn what I call a super booster. I call them that because they can be exponentially helpful. They can help you at many companies instead of just their own. But if their company's an option, they'll probably keep you to themselves, not kind of shop you around to friends at other companies. I've had people who started the 2-hour job search on a Monday and landed an offer by Friday that same week. They just got lucky. One of the first people they reached out to was a super booster who had a friend who had an opening, informational led to an interview, and the rest is history. That is not a typical result, though. I will not tell you to expect to have a job in a week, but it can happen. The returns are very stochastic for this process. But you only get that benefit if you give them that genre of interest. To me, this is the modern elevator pitch. So that 2-minute elevator pitch, like most elevators are not 2 minutes long. I don't know why they call it that. But this 10-word phrase that provides a logical subset of all potential employers, that helps you establish immediate credibility with strangers. You might have 3 or 4 of these phrases that you swap between, depending on the genre of company that you're reaching out to. But this will pay dividends. Again, another great use of AI right here. Once you've done your lamp list, plug your companies back into a ChatGPT or a Bard and say, what themes do you see among these companies? And it will probably provide you some themes just like this one, pretty straightforward. So let ChatGPT help you with that genre if you're struggling with that. So here are the 6 points. You have access to that in the slides once you're able to download those after the session. But let's, and so we need to talk about tracking some messages. So, well, we're gonna, okay. So I'm a little bit hoarse. I'm gonna give my voice a break. If the success rate on our outreach email is only about 20%, that means we're gonna need to send follow-up attempts and try more people. I'm gonna give my voice a break, so I brought in my handsome assistant to talk you through tracking all of this outreach email. So handsome assistant, take it away.
Hi, I'm Steve Dalton, Program Director for Daytime Career Services at Duke's Fuqua School of Business and the author of the 2-Hour Job Search. I'm here today to discuss the importance of tracking job search outreach. There are 3 main questions we're gonna cover today. First, why is tracking job search outreach important? Second, what's the best way to track job search outreach? And third, where's the best place to track job search outreach? Why is tracking job search outreach so important? Well, outreach leads to informational meetings, which leads to internal referrals, which leads to your best chance at getting an interview. To maximize your chance at getting an interview, you have to ensure that every link of that chain is successful. The first link of that chain relies upon following up on unresponsive contacts, as well as knowing when to give up on a contact to pursue someone else in parallel. This amount of outreach can get pretty overwhelming pretty quickly. So that's why our next question is going to be, what's the best way to track all of this outreach? I recommend a technique called the 3B7 routine. 3B7 simplifies your outreach to one simple rule. Anytime you email somebody for the first time, you set 2 reminders on them, one for 3 business days later and one for 7 business days later. The 3 business day reminder is a signal to try somebody else if you have not yet heard from that contact. This gives you a second chance to quickly develop an advocate within that organization, because the likelihood of getting a response after the 3rd business day is quite low. The 7B reminder gives you a second chance to build a relationship with an unresponsive contact, while also differentiating you from job seekers who may reach out once, but don't follow up if they don't get a response. Now, where's the best place to track outreach? You may be tempted to rely upon your memory or Excel, but the best place is actually a calendar, like Google Calendar or Microsoft Outlook. The reason your memory is a bad place to track outreach is because it's neurochemically impaired. Job searches are stressful, and stress produces cortisol in the brain. Cortisol, unfortunately, makes you forgetful. You may combat this stress and forgetfulness with caffeine, but caffeine also produces cortisol in the brain, worsening the problem. It's critical you export your memory function to something that doesn't make mistakes, namely a computer. Excel is also a bad option because it's terrible at handling dates. It's a reactive tool rather than a proactive tool. It's better at highlighting what you forgot to do yesterday instead of teeing up what you're supposed to do today. I recommend entering your 3B and 7B reminders directly into your calendar as 7 a.m. appointments. This gives you all day to take action, and calendar notifications are much harder to miss or ignore than email notifications are. So in closing, the 3B7 routine maximizes your effectiveness in the outreach phase of this process while simultaneously minimizing your stress. Thank you very much.
Okay, so we'll pause that right here. I think this is the best single shot of this process. So I'll ask you a few comprehension questions to make sure you got the main points. What is the maximum number of attempts you make to reach out to someone before you give up on them? 2, correct answer. So after how many business days do you send your one and only follow-up attempt on an unresponsive contact? 7, yeah, it's not 3. Where did we talk about 3 business days earlier in the session though? We used it to define something. Yeah, it's when boosters responded. So this is a booster finding algorithm. So 3 business days, if we haven't heard from them, we're probably not going to hear back from someone. But we don't need to wait another week to get ignored by this person before we try somebody else. So this just gives us a nice way. So we're using something called temporal construal theory here. Basically, it's construal theory is decision-making theory. Temporal means time, has to do with time. We are thinking clearly about what our follow-up should look like when we hit send on the email. We are not thinking clearly about our follow-up after we've been ignored by somebody for a week. So we want to make our decisions in advance of a decision point where we're making better decisions rather than waiting until the heat of the moment to decide. Okay, so those are the main points of this. What questions do you have about 3B7? I'll let you guide how long we talk about this. There's one question I'll give you for free if you don't ask it, but what questions do you have about this? Yeah?
What's the benefit, what's the negatives to not just contacting one person and then another person and then another person on the same day?
Yeah, so why not contact 5 people on the same day? This is what we're doing at one company, but we're going to be doing this with 6 companies at once. So you could say, well, why reach out to just one person? Why not reach out to 5 people? Here's what happens. And I don't want to generalize because generalizing is bad, but it's always investment bankers that do this. They'll email 5 people at the same company on the same day, not realizing that those 5 people typically will get together at lunch and make fun of the job seeker emails that they received. Even worse than that, though, 4 of the 5 might say yes, and you're having the same exact conversation 4 times, all of which tell you to go talk to the same person next. You could have gotten that in one conversation, but instead you just used 4 hours of your time to do that thing. So it's purely an efficiency play. Let's give someone 3 business days to demonstrate they might be a booster. And if they don't exercise that option and show us that, we'll try somebody else. We only miss out on 3 days from that one person. But I think you have time in a couple of months to get 5 true boosters, people that'll be there for you for years to come, but especially for the search. For optimal efficiency, we want 1 booster at 5 companies rather than 5 boosters at 1 company, so that the informational interviews are time consuming to set up, to conduct, to follow up on. You'll get homework from these conversations. We want to try to find our one set of eyes and ears and let them farm us out. Tell us who the most helpful person to talk to next is, rather than you guessing from the outside. So it's to help you kind of throttle the extra work that you're doing and ensure that you get a maximum return on your effort. But we are technically emailing 6 people at once, just they're going to be 6 people at 6 different companies rather than 6 people at 1 company. Good question. Yes?
Is there a time where you could send a email to multiple people, like where you copy them all in or make them all the sender?
There's a very famous study, I forget what study, where it was done, but basically the more people you have involved, so this one was famously, they would hear somebody, they'd be in a group team exercise, and one of the people would start making sounds of distress like they were having a heart attack. And what they found is the more people were in that exercise, the less likely any one of them was to take action and help the person that was having the heart attack. So there's a far higher intervention rate when there was only 1 other person or 2 other people on the call than when there were 5 or 6. So that's kind of what we're going with. If you copy 5 people, all of them will assume somebody else is going to be the one that helps you. So no, I would say we're going to go 1 person at a time. And if that first person doesn't reply to us, we'll try another person. We're not going to mention the first person that ignored us already because we don't want to look like we're throwing them under the bus. But we'll just try them in isolation. But I don't find an advantage of copying a bunch of people because then everybody thinks it's going to be someone else's responsibility to respond. Good question. Yes?
When you get the out-of-office reply when you send your first email, do you start the process over, or how long do you wait?
So for the out-of-office reply, if it's a week or longer, then I would push my 3B and 7B reminders back by that number of days and try somebody else immediately. If it were less than a week, I would just simply move my reminders back and wait it out. So a week is kind of my cutoff for when I would just immediately try somebody else instead of waiting on someone. Good question. Any other questions about this? Excuse me. The one question I usually get from an audience you have not asked yet, and that is, what does the 7 business day follow-up email look like? I used to have a different script for it, but now this recipe changes over time. Now I recommend what I call Malcolm's recipe. He was one of my former colleagues at the Career Center. His formula for sending the 7 business day follow-up is to send the same exact message 7 business days later. Literally copied and pasted it, send it again. My recommendation is a bit of a modification on his. I recommend sending the same exact message, but through a different channel. So if your first email went through a LinkedIn group connection or it went through a direct email to their work address, your follow-up attempt would be through a LinkedIn invitation to connect. Same exact message though. It's pretty short, so it fits in that limited character count that you have. But my recommendation is send the same exact message, but through a different channel for best results. Minimizes your work and gives them a chance to save face because you're not calling out that this is your second attempt. Okay, so let's wrap up this section and then get to our home stretch, which is talking about our informational meetings. Okay, so the nice thing about 3B7 is you don't have any work on weekends by definition. It's all only during business days. This is what it would look like if you plotted it out. This is what it looks like for 1 company, but you're doing this for 6 companies at once. My recommendation is split your outreach when you start this process. Instead of sending 6 emails on day 1, send 2 per day for the first 3 business days. And then on the 4th day, that's when your 3 business day reminders start popping up. So it spreads out the work a little bit. The work will naturally spread itself out. You'll get to the point where you have many days off. There's simply no work to do. There's nobody to follow up with. The thing is, you've got to follow this recipe exactly. If you're following it, most of the time you're not following 3B7. So if you follow this, for 6 companies, you are doing everything that could be humanly expected of you in a job search. And if somebody responds to you within 3 business days, you don't have to send additional emails. Like, you just focus on that one person that seems to be responsive. But the trade-off is if you have to follow the rules exactly. My recommendation is don't even think of these people as people when you email them. They're lottery tickets with 20% odds of success. So email them and immediately forget their names until they get back to you within 3 business days, in which case they are saints and they are scholars and you will honor them. Or your 7 business day reminder pops up and it's time to send them that kind of mechanical, okay, invitation to connect. Go ahead and ignore me again. But that's the only time I want you thinking of those people's names. So divorce yourself from the rejection that is inherent in this process. If it worked 100% of the time, you wouldn't need me, and everybody would do it. But the fact that it only works 20% of the time is why it's so powerful when you do find a booster. And that video that you just saw, you can watch that. It's on YouTube. There's the link. Okay, big takeaways here. Choose contacts that are functionally relevant above all else. That's the most important factor. Alumni are nice, but you need to talk to people who are doing the job you want one day. Target boosters, but expect obligates and curmudgeons to waste your time along the way, especially obligates. They're heartbreaking. They're the cost of doing business. But the boosters will make it worth your while. And third, treat this process probabilistically. Don't fall in love with contacts in advance because most people are going to ignore you. So just plan on emailing them and forgetting them until they get back to you or until that 7 business day reminder pops up. As a result, this is the end of our 2 hours from the title of the 2-hour job search. We've sent our first batch of emails. Now we need people to just respond before we can make any further progress. This is a team sport. We need people to, we need teammates here. But as a result of this, with a 20% response rate, we're going to get at least 1 informational in most cases. So we'll finish up with that today. Quiz question for you, though. What is the, at least what % of your 6-point emails word count should be about the reader, not the sender? 50%. Yeah, half the word count's about them, not you. Nicely done. Okay. So let's talk about these informational meetings. How exactly do you do these informationals? Everybody tells you to do them, but like, oh yeah, what do I talk about? Good news, I'm not going to say sell yourself here either. It's still awkward, so just don't do it. But what do we do instead is the question. Olivia Fox-Cabana wrote a book called The Charisma Myth, where her research revealed the single most likable, or the best predictor of whether you're perceived as being likable in a conversation is nothing that you actually say. It's how well you're perceived to be listening. So how do you, so you might be thinking, okay, Steve, I'm on board. Like, how do I demonstrate I'm listening really well? Well, let me show you an expert in action. Oh, who's a good boy? Dogs. Dogs are great at this. How many of you have dogs or have had dogs? Raise your hand. Do we love, yeah, dogs are great. How many do we love our dogs because they're good conversationalists? No, it turns out they can't talk. That's the thing about dogs. We love dogs because when they look at us, we are the only person in their world. And that is not an accident. That is evolution. 12,000 or so years ago, dogs used to be what? Wolves, yeah. They used to hunt other animals for a living. And then a few of them got together and said, hey, we could keep hunting other animals, or we could hang out with these humans who keep giving us food. Yeah, I like door number 2. And 12,000 years later, we get corgis. So I think we all win there. But they evolved with us. Their eyes got more muscular, so they could do puppy dog eyes. Their ears got pointier. Their features got more traditionally cute. Yeah, wolves have those beady eyes, those soulless. Yeah, they're scary, man. But they're great role models for what we're about to do here. Dogs can be likable without saying a word. You can do that too. And by having a script or an algorithm or a diagnostic to manage these informational meetings, it makes listening a lot easier. So you can pour more energy into making sure people feel heard rather than thinking about what you're going to say next. So the framework I'm going to teach you is called Tiara, and we'll talk about it in just a slide or two. It's important to note that informationals are journeys, though. Like, a lot of times before people are taught to do informationals, you think that, like, okay, we just need to come up with a list of questions and hopefully this person advocates for us. My question for you, would you ever tell me about yourself at the end of an informational interview? No, that would be kind of weird. We just spoke for half an hour, like, why are you asking me this now? Would you ever ask about next steps at the start of an informational interview? No, like, we'll do that at the end. So apparently order matters. Like, there is an order that makes sense here, but often you're not taught that. You're just taught, let's come up with a list of questions. So I want you to look at this as we're taking them on a journey. So there should be some thoughtfulness about the way we order our questions. So it helps to just sort of know what the shape of an informational looks like. We start off with small talk. If we had more time, I'd share. Some of you are good at small talk, and if so, just keep doing you. Just know I'm incredibly jelly. I've never been good with small talk. If you've ever struggled with small talk before an informational meeting, and you're like, Steve, don't you have a 3-question algorithm for small talk before an informational meeting? Of course I do. Look at me. Of course I have one. And it's at that YouTube link. Check it out if you are curious to see how people like me have to live. But that is to establish that initial likability. You're a stranger. Small talk is what you use to gain initial levels of trust and likability. But then the question order still matters. We wouldn't dive in with what next steps should I take. So that's where TR comes in. How do we manage that Q&A portion? And then we'll have some next steps at the end to account for. Now the goal, make no mistake, it's to get a referral, a human referral after this conversation's over. However, we're not going to ask for a referral. I don't know if you've ever done an informational meeting with somebody, or where someone's done an informational with you, and they've asked you who they should speak to next. It's a super uncomfortable moment. I would never share a referral with a stranger without getting my contact's permission to share their name first. So if you're ever to say, Steve, who should I talk to next on a phone call with me? I might like you, but I'm going to say, nobody comes to mind. I'll let you know if that changes. And you can't really ask me that question again. So we'll give them a safe space to share a referral, but I don't want you making that ask in the live conversation itself. It's a popular piece of conventional wisdom for job searching. I think it's a better request to make after some time has passed, after this informational. We'll talk about that shortly. But the goal of this conversation is to get a referral to someone who knows more about jobs than you do currently, or the person that you reached out to does. So how do we ask without asking? We'll talk about that shortly. Okay, so we've already established the question order does matter. So what order makes the most sense? Well, that's where the TR framework comes in. So if my colleague, former colleague at Fuqua, Gavin Fitzsimmons, he's a faculty, he did some research that showed that if you get people to play with Play-Doh, like the child's toy Play-Doh, before they do a brainstorming task, they're more effective at coming up with ideas in that brainstorming task. So creativity can be primed. So if we were to ask for advice for our first question, we're going to get pretty obvious advice. We haven't primed creativity yet. Oh, just keep talking to other people who know stuff. Okay, great, thanks. That's what I'm doing here. So how do we prime creativity? Well, we ask them questions that portray them as an expert in their field. Nobody wants to give you a bad answer to the question, why are you so good at your job? So we're going to ask questions like that before we start shifting the frame to ask them questions more like we would ask of a mentor. Now, the questions we ask all have a couple of traits in common. They're going to be fun and flattering. So a common question that is very popular, that is just the worst, is what is the corporate culture like at your firm? That is neither fun nor flattering to answer because I'm asking about the company, not the person. And the person's not the expert on the company. They've only had one person's perspective on the company. So they're like, you ask me about what the corporate culture is like at Duke. I'm trying to think, what are the 8 pillars of greatness that are on the website that I haven't checked in 17 years? And I'm giving you a laundry list of generally positive qualities, but none of it really means anything to me. So the better way to ask that question, what is the corporate culture like at your firm, is to make it a superlative and to ask for an opinion. What is your favorite part of the corporate culture at your firm? I'm the world's expert on my favorite things, and by asking for a superlative, I'm going to give you the one thing that I think really defines the Duke culture more than any other, instead of giving you 8 things that are generally positive qualities. So flattering and fun answer is going to be the common theme for these questions. So I recommend starting with trend questions. They're macro questions. You're only going to be asking one question per TRL letter. So it's more about keeping the conversation going. We'll talk about that shortly. But I like trends. Here are examples of trend questions. How has this business changed most since you started? How do you predict what trend is most impacting your business right now? How do you predict it will be most different 5 years from now? All of them are basically asking them, why are you so good at your job? But give me a superlative, like what trend is most impacting this business, and it's all your opinion, so you can't be wrong here. It's a fun question to answer. So these are nice, big, juicy trend questions. You can get a sense for it. Like ChatGPT is great at giving you trends, can give you a SWOT analysis on a company. So definitely you do your preliminary research with that. But the nice thing about a good trend question, ask 10 different people, get 10 different answers, all of which are correct. So it helps you form a mosaic picture of what the space is like. Now, after we do that, we can get a little more personal. It would be weird if your first question in the informational would be something like, what's been your best professional decision so far and why? That's a little bit too intimate or personal, but after we do a trend question, it's a fun, like, superlative opinion question. Now we can ask that slightly more personal question. What's been your best professional decision so far and why? What surprises you most about this job? Or you've been here for 10 years. If you had to attribute your success to one skill or trait, what would it be? And then a good follow-up would be, is that unique to you or is that common amongst your peers? So why are you so good at your job? Again, that's the kind of genre of expertise questions. Flattering and fun to answer. Now we've primed creativity. People are giving you genuinely their best answer to your questions because they're fun to answer. Now we start switching the frame towards mentorship type questions. So you could say, what should I be doing right now to best prepare for a career in this field? The problem with asking the question that way is they might say something like this, well, when I was in your position 10 years ago, here's what I did. And that may or may not still be helpful. Things change a lot in 10 years. A whole pandemic happened in the last 10 years. So things have probably changed a little bit. What we want is for them to use their knowledge to help beat the system today, not the system from 10 years ago. So make them the hero in your story. The way you do that, if you were me, what would you be doing right now to best prepare for a career in this field? So how do you beat the system of today knowing what you know now? If you were to start your career over again, what sort of project would you seek out first to get off to the best possible start? If I want to learn to speak like someone who's had the job for 5 years before I even start, how would you go about doing that if you were me? So make them the hero in your story. You're going to get more sophisticated answers. Make them feel the pain of being back in the job search. Don't let them get away with just saying what they did when they were younger. This is all lead up to the pivot question of the conversation. The pivot question is the resources question. This question is always the same, and it's very specifically worded. What resources do you recommend I look into next? What resources do you recommend I look into next? What are we looking for ideally? What do we want to hear back? A referral. Yeah, we want a referral. This is their safe space. If they're comfortable sharing a name with us, this is the time to do it. That'll happen in about 20% of cases. You'll get a referral. It's going to be the minority case, though. If somebody is not comfortable sharing a name with you, like some people are very open with their network. Some people have already gotten this person's permission to share their name with job seekers. But if people are not comfortable giving you a name, what they'll usually say next is, what sort of resources are you looking for? Now, to me, this is a signal to pivot away from referrals towards literal sources of information. So I'd go to a question like, are there any daily or weekly or monthly newsletters you find particularly helpful for staying current on your space? What's the most important 10 minutes of research you do in a given day or week to stay current on your industry? Is there a favorite conference that you have that you prioritize attending each year? And if so, why do you like it so much? So literal sources of further investigation for you to make yourself smarter. So that's where if they don't give us a name and they ask what sort of resources we're looking for, to me that's a signal they're not giving us a name today. Pivot away from that, ask for sources of information. With any time you have remaining, feel free to cut this last one with AI now. Like I used this, so assignment questions, basically assignment is another word for project. This would be a question like, what's been your favorite project so far and why? What's been your most impactful project so far and why? It used to be really hard to understand like what specific projects a person would do in a job. Like you're a product manager for Google, cool. What does that mean? What do product managers at Google actually do? What sort of projects do you need to produce for them? With AI, this is super easy information to get at now. Just go into AI and go into ChatGPT and say, what are 10 projects that a product manager for Google would be expected to produce? It helps you understand, is this a career path that I'm actually going to find interesting? Do I actually want to do that work or not? Used to be you could only get that through talking to people or through attending corporate events and then asking very specific questions. But often, like if you ask that question at a corporate event, what's been your favorite project so far or why? Or like what's a typical week look like for you? They're almost always going to say, well, I send a lot of email. I attend a lot of meetings. Like that's not helpful, man. So use this if you have time remaining. If it feels like, okay, we're wrapping the conversation up after the resource topic, absolutely feel free to close the conversation there, especially if your time's up. I want you to be thoughtful about how you're using their time. Okay, so here's a recap. Here's one question, an example question from each of the Tiara topics, just so you have access to it in your notes. If you want more examples, you can check the book out of the library, and you can get a list of questions per topic. Once you've done 3 of these informationals using Tiara, you don't need Tiara anymore. I still recommend it. I use it myself all the time whenever I'm doing kind of an interview with somebody, because it's a really nice journey to take people on that helps maximize the chance you turn the stranger into someone who likes you with small talk, and then someone who's thinking creatively about their work with the trend and insight questions to someone who might advocate for you with the advice, resources, and assignment questions. Okay. So sometimes you're going to get, you're just asking 1 question per Tiara topic. So you'll go in with only 5 questions. It really puts the pressure on you to keep the conversation going. A 2017 Harvard study showed the most likable behavior in a conversation itself is a follow-up question. So we're going to get better at follow-up questions here. I think because it demonstrates you're listening, you're following along with the conversation, and you find what they're saying to be interesting enough to probe deeper. But sometimes they don't give you all that much information to work with. You'll ask them for a tread and they'll give you a very short answer, which is not enough time or information to give you an informed follow-up question. So as you're starting this process out, I recommend literally having a list of extenders written in front of you. Extenders are phrases like this that signal you find what they're saying to be interesting, but you want them to continue talking. These will become second nature to you as you do. Once you've done your 3rd informational, you'll have these unlocked. They'll be ready for you. But when you're starting out, it's not uncommon to freeze up a little bit. If they give you a very short answer, like, you'll be tempted to move to the next question. I don't want you to do that. So anytime you ask a Tiara question, you're on the hook to ask at least 1 follow-up. But if they give you a short answer, feel free to dive into one of these extenders. That's interesting. Can you tell me more about that? Continue. Can you go into more detail on that one? These will become second nature. Take advantage of them, but make that list. Have it written in front of you so on a Zoom call or phone call you can glance down and find your thread again. Okay. Any questions about any of Tiara so far? Okay. Oh, yeah.
Do you think there's any value in using Tiara during an actual interview, like when it's your turn to start asking questions towards the end? Does it make any sense to use Tiara as well?
Yeah, so at the end of interviews, they'll say, what questions do you have for me? My recommendation is have a mix of Tiara-style questions that are flattering and fun to answer, just to give people a feel-good note to end on. Like, where do you think this business is headed the next 5 years? How do you think it's going to change most? Again, why are you so smart at your job? Some people are into that, and some people are not into that. So I'd have a combination of Tiara-style questions with what I call like the 25-cent questions, the expensive ones that show you did some research. They tend to take a lot of time to come up with, and once you get an answer to them, like they're usually objective, so like you can't really ask them multiple times because they're fact-based. So do some research, come up with some research questions. Again, ChatGPT, really helpful here. Like, what are some questions I can ask at the end of an interview for a product manager at Google and get a sense for what might work. But I'd want to have a mix of like research style questions and Tiara style questions and see which one I'm getting more energy back from. If they give me more time to ask questions, I know which way to lean once I see their response. It's facilitation 101. If you ever get an increased level of energy in response to a question that you ask, you're probably headed in the right direction. So just follow the energy, see what they're responding to. That would be my recommendation there. Good question. I talk more about that in The Job Closer than the 2-hour job search. My second book, The Job Closer, which goes more into interview theory. Yep.
How do you typically end off out of a Tiara question in mind?
How do you end a Tiara question? Generally,
Like in terms of conversation, or like, is it just like thank you for your time, or?
oh, let's talk about next steps now. So how do we end this conversation? If you get a referral, like they say, well, if you what resources do you recommend to look into next? Sometimes they make it super easy on you, and they say, well, if you want to get a job, are you interested in us? Do you want to interview with us? Well, if you want to get a job with us, you got to go talk to Wendy next. She's the hiring captain of non-core schools. She'll set you up. Great. You could just wrap up the conversation right there, skip assignments, and say, thank you. I'm going to reach out to Wendy right away. I will follow up with you in a couple weeks to let you know what happens. Then set yourself a reminder for a couple weeks later and let them know what happens. Quick way to lose boosters in this process is take their help and never speak to them again. So program follow-ups with your boosters, because if you treat them well, they will be there for you for years to come. Now, your thank you note will go out within 24 hours. You're not going to ask for anything in that thank you note. It's going to be, thank you very much for your time. Here's a particular piece of insight or advice that you gave me that was particularly resonant with me. Like, if you haven't already clarified with them that is it okay if I reach back out to you with any additional questions I might have, ask them that. But in 80% of cases, you're not going to get a referral. Like volunteered to you. So how do we end the conversation in that case? My recommendation would say our time's almost up. You've given me a lot to think about. I'm going to take the weekend to reflect. Is it okay if I reach back out to you with any additional questions? To which they'll say yes, because to say no to that, they'd have to be a massive jerk. But we're using a concept here called commitment and consistency. Robert Cialdini was a scientist. He found that if you get people to verbally say yes, they will do something in the future, that increases the likelihood they do that thing in the future. That's why salespeople are very good about getting you to say yes. Can I check back in with you in a few weeks to see how your process is going? You'll say yes. That makes you more likely to respond when they check back in with you, which they always do. So your thank you note will go out within 24 hours. That will not ask for anything. So what I want you to do is say this at the end of your informational, set a reminder for 1 week later, send your thank you note within 24 hours where you don't ask for anything again. Highlight the best piece of advice they gave you, ask if it's okay if you keep in touch, and ask them additional questions. They'll say yes. And then when that 1 week reminder comes up, I want you to email them this. Now the request for a referral is less threatening when you do it over email versus live. So I would send this email. Thanks again for your time last week. Upon further reflection, this is definitely something I'd like to pursue further. How would you do so if you were me? For example, can you recommend someone I should speak to next? The nice thing about sending this over email is that they don't have to, it's not just the first person that comes to mind. They can actually be thoughtful. Oh, who should you speak to next? Okay, that might be the right person. Let me see if they're okay with me sharing their name with a job seeker. So it gives them time to organize things on their end. It's not as pressure laden as asking during the live conversation itself. So this is when you try to convert that referral from an informational. It's 1 week later over email rather than at the end of the informational interview. Okay. Once it feels like you're at a stopping point with this particular advocate, I recommend switching them to a monthly check-in. And monthly is in quotes. It could be every 5 or 6 weeks. It could be every 8 weeks, whatever you're feeling. But I call this subsequent relevance. When we have a job, we are not necessarily paying attention to entry-level jobs that are available at the company because we've already got one. However, once we know a job seeker's out there and we like them, now that information starts making more sense to us. But you'll need to prompt them every so often to remind them that you're out there and that they liked you and help them, encourage them to connect the dots of, oh, there is that opening. Let me put you in touch with the right person for that. So we're going to have to check in with them periodically to remind them that we're out there and prompt them for action because they will forget and move on with their lives until we check back in with them. Okay. Once you've hit play on this process, you're going to be networking with 6 companies simultaneously until you're done. So we will only move to company number 7 after we get closure with one of our top 6. So closure can be positive. Club Penguin promises an interview for us. Great. Okay, that's awesome. Our work here is done. Maybe they say, well, our interviews don't start until February. Check in with me if you haven't heard from anyone by January 1st. Okay, great. We have marching orders. What we want is to feel that we have a set of eyes and ears in that organization that is looking out on our behalf. So if we get an interview or a promise of an interview that we find credible, great. My recommendation, if you're not sure, am I good at this company? I recommend asking the golden question. The golden question is my way of gauging, is this person really a booster or are they an obligate? The golden question is this. Is there anything else you would do if you were in my position to maximize your chance of getting an interview for the next job that opens up? So again, make them the hero in your story. They'll think harder for you if you do that. But what we're looking for is we want an answer that gives us concrete next steps and indicates that they are willing to keep in touch. Those are the 2 factors of boosters. They give you actionable next steps and they want to keep in touch. Obligates, they tend to give you vague next steps and tend to say goodbye. So if they say something like, just keep doing what you're doing and something will turn up. Good luck with your search. That's an obligate. They're saying goodbye. They're giving you not very helpful next steps. But boosters will say things like, no, you're good. Or they'll say, I only know this division. There are 3 divisions here. Each one hires separately. You need to get a contact with the other 2. I know somebody at one of them, but the other one, you're on your own. Okay, concrete next steps and an indication that they want to keep in touch. So the golden question is a nice way to gauge, are you done with this company? Do you have your eyes and ears? Let them be your traffic cop at that organization. If they give you, tell you what to do next and you trust them, you're good. But a common error people will make is they mistake obligate behaviors for boosters when you're starting this process out. Once you get your first real booster, you will know what a booster feels like. But until then, rely on the golden question to make sure you feel good about this person before you move on. Closure can also be negative. So it could say, I'm sorry, we only hire experienced hires. So go get relevant experience somewhere else and we'll talk to you next year. So it could be, this year is not going to work. My recommendation is if you get closure at a company, don't highlight it in green or red. I don't want color coding in your lamp list. Delete the entire row or cut it and put it into a different worksheet if you want to save it for posterity's sake. But I only want you ever paying attention to the top 6 rows of your lamp list. This is not a tracking document. I don't want to see like information in the 8 columns to the right of this. This is a document that will hopefully stay closed most of the time on your laptop. You only open it when you have bandwidth to reach out to a new company. So focus on those 6 until you get closure at one of those 6, then move to number 7. When you get another closure on another one, you move to number 8, and if you follow the recipe, you're going to be done by the time you get to 10. Okay, let's recap this section, and we'll turn it over to general Q&A. Big takeaways from part 3. Be likable, don't sell yourself. Selling yourself, it's an outdated concept, it's uncomfortable. Just don't, being likable, anybody can do. Ask reusable questions that are both flattering and fun to answer. And get the referral by email a week later if one is not volunteered to you, which it will not be for most of the time. As a result of this process, your odds will steadily improve over time. As you have more sets of eyes and ears at your target companies looking out on your behalf, you get exponential benefit from that. So 8 hours doing the 2-hour job search may not feel particularly efficient, but it will bring you 8 hours closer to employment in a way the same 8 hours spent just applying online over and over and over will not. Like, you just don't learn anything and you don't get predictably closer. So this will increase your odds steadily, and you'll learn stuff along the way. It's just a more human way to do the search, and it's a skill that you will take with you for the rest of your life. Okay, so I think you're ready for the final exam. Hopefully you think so too, but here we go. One question from each of our 3 sections, and then we'll wrap up. Okay, so from part 1, what is the minimum number of employers necessary to make a lamp list? 40, absolutely correct, nicely done. Part 2, you'll encounter 3 types of contacts: boosters, obligates, and curmudgeons, nicely done. Part 3, when's the best time to explicitly ask for a referral after an informational? 1 week later over email, nicely done. Okay, let's check back in our learning objectives. Do we feel that we're more confident and competent in the following 3 items: identifying target employers, asking for time, and conducting informational meetings? Seen lots of nods, and I have nothing left but to say thank you. Here are our big takeaways from today. Part 1, be the bachelor in your own search. Don't be one of 25 contestants over and over. It's a terrible way to live, and it's just not all that successful. Part 2, from your outreach, be probabilistic. So you can't guarantee any single person responds to you or gives you a referral. So just play the odds. Most people will ignore you, but the people who get back to you are going to be super helpful. Part 3, don't sell yourself, be likable. And finally, you are fishing for lobster in this process, not fishing for fish. When you fish for fish, you put bait on a hook, you throw the hook in the water, fish swim up and you have dinner. Or they don't, and you're right back where you started the next day. So fishing for lobster don't swim up to hooks. You buy cages that you bait, and you check the cages every day or 2 to see if you caught anything. You never know that any lobster cage will ever catch you a lobster, but you do know with certainty the more cages you have in the water, the better your odds are of catching a lobster eventually. So each referral brings you 1 lobster cage closer to employment. And finally, enjoy learning a universal life skill that will apply no matter what job you go into. If you're feeling anxiety about it, the anxiety goes away after you've done your 3rd informational. You will know all of the routines. You'll see how easy it is to get people to talk about themselves and why they're so good at their work. So I encourage you to get to those first 3 informationals as quickly as possible so this can't scare you for the rest of your life. So with that, I will say thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. A little bit of housekeeping. Please click on the flash this survey. I'd love to know what you want more information on next time and less information on the next time I'm back. If you have questions about this process, consider this the start of a conversation, not the end. I have a LinkedIn group with about 13,000 people. So if you just want to lurk and see what questions other people have, definitely check that out. And if you want to connect on LinkedIn, I'd love to hear from you. That's my LinkedIn profile, so feel free to hit me up and get connected with me. And finally, if you like this book and you like the idea of having recipes for your job search, but you want more, I have a second book called The Job Closer, which goes into everything before and after networking for interviews. So how to answer, tell me about yourself, how to draft a cover letter that actually moves the needle and matters, how to negotiate your offer. It's a bunch of frameworks for all of the other steps in this process. So with that, I will turn it over to your questions. You have a few minutes. So what questions do you have any questions about anything we covered today? Yes?
So I found before when I've asked questions similar to the resources one, getting just a link to a job app, how would you say that normally works out? Is that a good thing, bad thing? Or?
So if they try to give you an application referral rather than a human referral, I'd be concerned because that is a very common obligate strategy. Oh, well, apply online and put my name down, and you know that that is kind of like them giving you vague next steps and saying goodbye. Like, good luck, maybe something will turn up, and have fun with your search. So for me, it's very specific wording. That's why I put the wording exactly in the slides. What would you be doing next if you were in my position to maximize your chance of getting consideration the next time an offer opens up? Like, that's a lot harder for an obligate to just say, oh, put my name down when you apply, then you're good. Like, they'll know that that's not really credible. That's not how it worked for them. So I would say, like, what would you do if you were in my position, and see what they say then? It's a pretty common obligate behavior to point you to an online application. Now, some major tech firms, that's the way that it gets done. But I still believe that having referrals, even at those big tech firms, still helps you get to the top of the pile, even if they say, oh, we don't do referrals here. I don't know how they can't do referrals unless they just stick to people who've done the job before but somewhere else. Yeah, so be skeptical. Make sure that you feel like there are boosters telling you that rather than an obligate. Other questions? Yes?
About how long would you say the cycle takes?
Good question. How long does this process take? I think if you are coming out of undergrad, or you're just coming out with a grad program, I think it takes about a month or 2 months. So of sustained effort following the recipe. That seems to be the norm, the median for most people. That cycle will get a little bit longer as you get more experienced in your career, where there's just fewer jobs that pay that much money. So it's going to be more like 2 to 3 months. But for most people that are fresh out of undergrad or coming out of a grad degree program, 1 to 2 months is the norm. But again, it can happen as soon as a week, and it can go a little bit over, but typically what I see, about 6 weeks. Good question. Anything else? Yes?
Would you suggest mailing all 6 companies on the same day?
I recommend splitting your outreach. So question, would I recommend emailing all 6 companies on the same day? I'd recommend splitting up the 6 over 3 days. So email companies 1 and 2 on Monday, 3 and 4 on Tuesday, 5 and 6 on Wednesday. And that way your 3 business days reminders start popping up on Thursday. So if you heard from both of those people that you emailed on Monday, you have Thursday off. Like, there's no work for you to do because your 3 business day reminder pops up. Like, I've already heard from those 2 people. They seem to be like they might be boosters. Like, I don't need to try more people. If both of them ignored you, then you try a second person at each of those first 2 companies. But it splits up your work, gets you in the habit of doing a little bit each day. It's a lot less scary, too. Like, I found, so it used to be I recommended emailing all of the companies on the same day. Just like, let's get to work. But people who are new to this process felt a great anxiety about emailing 5 or 6 people on the same day in a brand new process. So it just shrinks the change and minimizes the starting problem. It's a smaller ask, just emailing 2 people instead of 6. So I'd say split it up over 3 days. Is there another question over here? All right. Oh, yeah.
So you said that knowing someone personal, like from your past life, you were better than short.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that one back up. I find that it's harder to change the urgency of existing contacts than it is to establish an urgent relationship with a stranger. So put it another way, you had a roommate freshman year that you may not have kept in touch with. It is hard to suddenly get that person reinvigorated with your job search after they've known you in a pretty casual, hands-off sort of way. It's really hard to get them to kind of change their perspective on you. Like, oh, this is a relationship I need to prioritize. And I find people really get discouraged when they try to involve distant family members or former friends or former coworkers from another life and get them their help in a job search. They're like, well, if this person from my former life isn't going to help me, nobody's going to help me. And I find the exact opposite. It's harder to get people who knew you in a casual way to treat you in an urgent way now than it is just get a stranger who's never known you as anything other than a job seeker to prioritize helping you. Now, it's always been a mentor-mentee relationship where you have time-sensitive needs. So my recommendation is if you have existing contacts that might be helpful, try to engage them, but don't give them any more time than you would a total stranger. So they still get 3B7. If they don't respond within 3 business days, you try somebody else, and you try somebody else. That way you don't break your heart too much over existing contacts. Just know that it's pretty common territory that people you've known from a former life will not help you the way you wish they would in a job search. Try to engage them, but don't be too disappointed, and don't be too hard on them. If they don't, it's just not human nature. Okay, at that, I'm going to say thank you very much for coming on out today. I'm going to stick around for a while, but I really appreciate you being here. Thanks a lot. Have a great rest of your night, y'all.